When preparing for this session, I had to look back and also see how much could I offer and how much have I learned in regards to ethics in the past few months. So I had to infuse some of the knowledge which I've acquired. Maybe without wasting any time, I want us to look at this simple introduction. I think it is clear that these authors, Gay and Arison, they see or look at ethics as a science. And that science which deals mostly with morals. And if you think about morals, most of the time we're looking at aspects such as wrong or right. That's why they say it is clear that ethics, as is a science, it also looks at what is right and what is wrong. But when you look at the American Educational Research Association, they indicate both the obligation in regards to the research participants and the profession. In other words, both these components, they have an obligation. The research participants and also the profession. And when you look at the research participants, in other words, we are more obliged to ensure that whatever we do is not of risk to anyone. And also, we are more obliged to say whatever research we conduct with the participants, we need to get a go-ahead from them. And hence, we talk about the informed consent. And I think the concept informed consent, we'll be talking about it in the next coming slides. But there's an obligation which you need to look at. And one of the things is that when you look at this obligation in regards to the research participants, going forward in my presentation, I'm going to share with you with some of the aspects which are happening in communities which we refer to them as indigenous communities. And also in some of the institutions. I've projected these outcomes, and when you look at them, you'll think that there are too many. They are not. Basically, the first one, I want us by the end of this session to be aware about the basic principles of ethical responsibility. And I think I'll be sharing that in one of the slides. And the other one, to understand the ethical issues that needs to be identified at the various stages of research. Because sometimes, you know, we thought that ethics is a stand-alone component in your research. But what happens is that the ethical consideration, it needs to be considered in some of your research steps. And I'm going to share that with you. The other one, you should be aware about ethics in conducting research within the communities which we refer to them as indigenous communities. Not that, I think I've used the word indigenous communities for now, but it also indicates to institutions to say you need to be aware about ethics wherever you conduct research. Ethics is paramount. And also, we'll try to understand what ethics is all about. And the other component which I feel as an outcome is crucial here, even though I won't go in detail about that, is an issue of ethical clearance. What is ethical clearance? Why do you need ethical clearance to conduct your research? What's the importance of that? What happens if you conduct your research and you didn't get any ethical clearance? And also, we should be aware of the aims and responsibility of the Research Ethics Committee, or maybe the Research ethics faculty, you know, because what I know is that when you look at the institution like UNISA, each and every college, it has a research ethics committee. And also maybe to understand the various categories of research risk. Because you can't talk about research if we don't talk about risk. So we need to understand why we need to focus on the risk. And I think some of us, if you look at some of these things, you look at ethics and you follow what's happening now. When I was looking at the news, I'm told that one of the organization, it has to withdraw its products from some of the retailers. Why? Because it's an issue of risk. Even though when I listen and they are trying to explain that risk, from their side they say it's not a huge risk. They talk about too upsetting, but they say we don't want to risk. We rather withdraw our product with all the costs associated with. So that's why we need to understand all these categories of research risk. All right, let's quickly look at what is research ethics. Colleagues, I know I've cited some of the work I've done, and I know that you can go further and get the best explanation of the concept itself. I'm not limiting you, colleagues, all right? But I have to use something which I thought it's almost recent. So, but when you look at OP indicates that ethics has to do with preventing harm. The concept harm is crucial because no one wants to do research at the same time to harm the participants. And harming the participant doesn't mean that you do it maybe physically. Participant can also be harmed in a way whereby after you have done your research, you publish the participants' work without getting an informed consent from them. For instance, you didn't tell them that this work is going to be published or is going to be shared in certain platforms. And after some time, one of the participants realized that the work has been shared. That could cause a huge of harm. Let alone even though the participants were anonymous. And also, it has to do with wronging others. Promoting goods, that's ethics. We need to promote goods. How many of us feels that if we have gone through this process of research and our work is being given a thumb up, you feel great to say, I've contributed to the science. And also it says, according to OP, being respectful and being fair. Remember that as a researcher, you don't own the participants. Hence, we need to respect them. If one of the participants says to you, if you conduct an interview and says to you, I'm not comfortable with this question, you need to respect the participant. Or if the participant says, I don't feel answering this type of a question, the participant must be respected. So that's why always when we do and design some of these instruments, we try to close those loopholes so that no participant will feel uncomfortable in a certain interview question. But further, when you look at Stradom, Stradom says ethics is a set of moral principles which is suggested by an individual or a group and is subsequently widely expected. The answer of the groups, they have protocols and procedures on how people can come and conduct research in their communities. And you'll never enter those group of communities without going through certain people within the community itself. They have a protocol, because if you look what's happening in some of the communities, we go there and do research. At the end of the day, that research is not of benefit to the community. So that's why some of them, they've set some protocols. And I think that's one document which I've read in the past. It's about the San people. They had a protocol around research. It is clear that all professions are guided by a code of ethics. There is no profession which does not have a code of ethics. Take accounting. It also has a code of ethics, all right? Take the profession of education in regards to educators. That's why we talk about SAYS. There should be a code of ethics. And that code of ethics, we need to respect it. We need to ensure that we don't do things in a different way, which is not acceptable. Hence, there is a serious consequences if you don't follow the profession's code of ethics or guidelines. The same thing with ethics. The same thing which is happening in our institutions in regards to ethics. If I am a student, and all of us, when we are doing a certain study at a certain level, you want to finish as quickly as possible, but you cannot skip stages. You cannot decide to say tomorrow, I'm going to collect data. There are processes which you need to follow until you reach the stage of collecting data. That's why the code of ethics is crucial. And also research ethics are a set of policies. That's why you find that in most of the institutions, as we have the research ethics committees, there are policies around that. Why I'm talking about research ethics as a set of policies? For argument's sake, what I know personally, other institutions are very upfront in regards to the relationship between the supervisor and the student, especially in regards to publication. They'll indicate in the policies to say, as a supervisor, there's no way I can publish the first work of my student without giving the authorship to my student. In other words, the first author in that publication, for the first publication, it should be the student. Then my name as a supervisor will follow later. And it's one of the things which is there in their policies, in their acts. I want us to look at the principles of ethical responsibility as indicated by these authors. There are three broad principles. I'm not going to go into deep. I'll try to explain them so that everyone could understand them. Here are the principles of ethical responsibility. In other words, we need to be ethical and responsible when we do research. The first one is autonomy, whereby the participants' autonomy should be respected. You remember I indicated that we need to respect the participant. Their autonomy, it also needs to be respected. Take into consideration their personal integrity and also independence. In other words, when you look at autonomy, my understanding is that, like I've said, you don't own them, all right? And they're not doing you any favor, by the way, all right? At the end of the day, it should be a two-way process. It should be a two-way process. Hence, if they say to you, before you can start to conduct this type of study in this institution, here are the protocols which you need to follow. So that autonomy needs to be respected.
Mayra, vai buscar a lapiseira da mamãe no quarto, please.
Also, when you respect their autonomy, you need to ensure that you source their informed consent. They need to agree to say, I agree to participate on this research under this condition you have indicated. And some of them, they are very upfront, by the way. When you design your informed consent, you find that some of the aspects they're not in agreement with. You need to negotiate with them. But remember that sometimes it's quite difficult. But what I've seen, very few participants will not agree with the informed consent. But in regards to the informed consent itself, which I'm still going to explain it in detail, make sure that you put all those aspects in advance. Don't take them by surprise. They need to be there in advance. So that if a participant says, based on what you are giving me here, I don't agree with 1, 2, and 3, the participants can have a way to say, I'm not willing to participate in this research. And also the autonomy, it indicates that we need to make sure that the participants are fully informed about the research. I think I've mentioned that one also. And also the issue of voluntary participation should be indicated to say you have a right to participate in the study and your participation is voluntary. All right? You can't force people to participate in your study. And also fully informed about the research, I've mentioned that one, sorry, and the issue of freedom of withdrawal. It needs to be clear and indicated to say, if you feel at any stage of this data collection process, you want to withdraw, they need to be guaranteed that. And also be told that no one is going to penalize you. And all of those things, they need to be covered if we talk about autonomy. And also think about the vulnerable groups that require a specific care regarding consent. Here I'm referring to some of the groups, like, for example, people who are at prison, the underage, the disabled people, if I can put it in that way. They need a certain way in regards on how to ensure that you put care when it comes to the consent. The abused ones also. So all those things, they need to be considered. Then another principle of ethical responsibility, we refer to it as non-maleficence. Basically, it means do no harm. I think it's a key principle. We want to do a research or studies where no one has been harmed, whether it's a human being or any living, I don't know what's the correct word, for every living species. We don't need to do any harm around that. Because sometimes we think about harm should not be done only on human beings. If we do research with certain species, we need to ensure that we don't do harm to them. I think those who are in science, they'll be able to understand that better than maybe welcome. But no harm should be eminent from any research you are conducting. You know, we have seen in the past on how some of the research have done so harm. And some of the people who conducted those research, they didn't follow any ethical procedures. And in some instances, when going forward, those people were taken into task. And some of those research or studies, some of them have to be withdrawn. And colleagues, I want to warn you, especially those of you who are in advance. I'm not trying to put you in a certain corner, but when you do research, you need to think thoroughly. There are topics which are quite sensitive. When you touch on those topics, make sure that you have closed all the loopholes. I think the other aspect about no harm, we need to think about personal information of the participants. That needs to be protected. Because if we disclose it without their permission, that could also cause a serious harm. People's personal information must be protected as much as possible. Otherwise, it could create a huge of harm. I remember when I was doing one of my postgraduate studies. By that time, the Department of Education was allowing us in our research proposal and our research report to indicate the name of the institutions. But going forward, when I was doing the second postgraduate study of mine, it was clear that there's no way in your research report you can include any institution's name, let alone the name of the participants. Because some of these things, they have a negative impact. If you look at the personal information of the participants, I think most of us nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, from my side, I've received a lot of emails which talk about Popeye. I don't know if it's how to say that acronym. The Protection of Personal Information Act of number 4 of 2013, whereby organizations, they guarantee that our information are protected. In other words, they can't disclose our information without us giving an informed consent. I think most of us, we have heard about that. And one of the things which we need to be careful also, I think this act, it also assists us when we look at the internet research or online research, where we get information online. How are we guaranteed that that information is correct? And the other thing which I like about this act, it accelerates, especially in research and ethics, to say, as much as we can do desk research, but we need to make sure that the information which we get and we use, it has been given consent. That's my thinking around that. The other issue in regards to do no harm, the issue of confidentiality of participants' information should be assured. Assure them that you are not going to disclose their information. Whatever they say is going to be used for this type of study. And you must protect their identity. Protect their identity. And I like it, if I can just give a simple example. If you want to do a certain study in some of the correctional services and you need to apply for a research proposal, they are upfront with many things. They are even upfront to say, when you are going to present whatever you want to present, maybe your findings or in regards to that research, there should be someone from the center. That's why they protect everything. And that's ethics. You may think that sometimes those rules, they limit you, but they are more concerned about ethics. I think the last one, as a principle of ethical responsibility, we refer to it as beneficence. Any conducted research needs to be of benefit. Colleagues, I think all of us, We want our research or our studies to be read. We want them to be of benefit to the communities we have researched about. We want them to be able to solve a certain issue or a challenge so that people could benefit from that. You can't just do a research without having a clue how is that going to benefit the communities. That's why some of the communities are very upfront. When you approach them, they will ask you, how are you going to benefit in your research? Because you look at some of the, I think last time I was talking about that with some of the students. Some of the institutions, I'm not pushing that, but I've seen and heard that we have an issue of fatigue survey. They feel that is too much survey has been done. And some of those surveys are not benefiting the institutions or the communities. So we need to make sure that whatever we do is of benefit. No one wants to do any research if your research is going to gather dust. You want people to learn about your research. You want people to cite you, to say, after reading your work, these are the points which came out, let alone internationally. Everyone wants to be cited. But the basic is that it needs to be of benefit. People who can benefit are the research population, those people whom you are doing research with, the other researchers. You know, sometimes you find that you have set out a certain piece. We sometimes refer to it as a manuscript. And other researchers from other continents, they want to see what's happening in the continent of Africa. Maybe specifically to South Africa about a certain aspect. Then they'll read your work and they'll cite you. So they benefit sometimes. Even the South African academics or researchers, they benefit from your work. You are going to go through a process of writing your research aspect, whether proposal or maybe your report. You are going to cite some of the researchers in your work, and hoping that in future you are also going to be cited. And also the society at broad, they benefit. You know, sometimes when you do a certain research, you are not even looking on how that is going to have a contribution. But after some time, you realize that you have contributed so much in this discipline. And as I'm coming from the discipline of education, sometimes you see that our work is not even read. We submit whatever we submit. But let me tell you, at certain quarters, people are reading our work, even though they won't acknowledge it. You see with the deeds. I remember this one which I did with a colleague of mine from another institution. I think it was somewhere in 2015. We're looking at a simple thing, because basically what I thought is that our schools, they have what you call a code of conduct. But my concern was that it was about the content. What's happening in this code of conduct? So I did a little bit of research around that. And let me tell you, before even I could submit my report, something was sparked out in one of the high school in regards to code of conduct. And immediately, when we submitted, even though they didn't come back to us, the department of a certain province, they gave instructions to school, to say, schools, you must revisit your code of conduct. It was a contribution, which I thought someone have read that report. But at the same time, what I'm trying to say is that don't push. People are going to read your work. The work we are doing now, in regards to maybe to the pandemic and so on, all those pieces of work, You may think that maybe they are not being acknowledged now because we are still under pandemic. After 50 years or even 100 years, when another huge pandemic will be coming, people are going to revisit that. How many of us now, if I can just make a simple example, how many of us have we read about the Spanish pandemic of 1918, which it happened 100 years ago, by the way. And when we do our stuff, we refer to that. So some of these things are not imminent. All right, maybe let me move forward. Sometimes I become touched with some of these things. Like I have indicated, ethical issues that needs to be identified during the various stages of research. In other words, sometimes when you look at ethics in your research proposal or in your research report, it's a standalone section, all right, where you tell us about the ethics you went through during your research. But basically, we need also to think about ethics as we go through the various stages of our research, as indicated by Creswell and Miriam. They indicated that when you try to understand these ethics stages, there are questions which could assist us. And there are many, colleagues, but I have to pick few of them. For example, when you are in the problem statement stage and you are developing your problem statement, you need to think on how will this study benefit those who are involved. It's an ethic issue. You remember we spoken about beneficence in the last slides, to say every research must benefit the participant or the communities. The next one, when you are already on the research aim or aims and questions, you need to think about some of these questions. How will the research aims be described to all participants? It's an ethic issue also. Is this study meaningful for participants? It goes further. When you already are on data collection stage, these are some of the questions you need to try to understand, which are going to assist you in regards to ethics. Will participants be put at risk? How participant confidentiality be protected? Will also participants have an option to withdraw? You remember we spoke about those things. And those are the ethical issues you need to think about when you talk about we are already on the data collection stage. The same with data analysis. How will this study protect anonymity or confidentiality? How the data will be protected? And who owns it? How are you going to protect this collected data? You go out, you issue questionnaire, and you analyze the questionnaire. So how are those questionnaires going to be protected? It's an ethical issue. And for how long? And especially in regards to qualitative, when you do interviews, how are you going to protect those transcripts or the recorded interview? Where are you going to keep them? For how long? The other one, what will happen after this data have been analyzed? Are you going to sit there as a researcher and write your report and say, submit to your faculty or to your college, then it goes to external examination, then it comes back, then they say you've met the requirement of your qualification with a pass or a percentage if it's a master's or an honors. What will happen after the data have been analyzed? Are you going to share the data with the participant or not? What promise did you give to your participant? Because if you have promised them and say in ethics that after I'm done with this process, I will come back to you and share the preliminary findings, or I will come back and give you the copy of the report itself. So all those things need to be looked in regards to ethics. Because if you promise people certain conditions and you don't fulfill, I'm telling you, going forward, you'll be catch up with that. The reporting of the research findings, like I've indicated, have any findings been suppressed? It's an ethical issue. Because sometimes other people, based on the data analysis, and they go to the findings, they suppress some of the findings. And what will happen if that is being picked up? You are in trouble. All right? Or maybe the findings have been falsified, the false findings, or inverted. We have cooked up the findings. And colleagues, I want to say to you, ethics is very, very clear. Some of the things, they won't come up now. Some of the things, they will come up late. You know, this process, I think all of us, we have heard about some of these things, which are not even going to mention some of the names. How many people have their qualification being recalled, if I can use the word recalled, after years? And some of them have benefited around those qualifications because there was some ethical aspect which was flawed. Simple ethical aspect. A simple one which I can share with you guys. Sometimes what I've seen as supervisors of our students, we become so carried out to such an extent that we even go at the extent of not giving our student a leeway of becoming creative and innovative. We infuse our ideas, if I can put it in that way. And that is one of the ethical flaws. And if they could be picked up later, in future, we are in trouble. So we need to be careful about some of these things. Starting from now, all of us, we know about, like Memakola have indicated, Turnitin, plagiarism. Why we emphasize to say we need to start to avoid plagiarism now and start to paraphrase. There are reasons for that. But we'll talk about maybe some of those things in one day. Was the research findings discussed with the relevant people? All right, have we discussed them? Did you discuss the research findings with your supervisor? Did you go and say, let me go and share my preliminary research findings, maybe in a seminar or with the participant who took part in my research, briefly, so that if they have questions, you are able to clarify those questions. I want us to, maybe briefly, to look at ethics in regards to online. Colleagues, I'm not saying the work we get online is wrong. It's good because we are now on internet, on technology. But what's important is that there are ethics. There are ethics. The internet research ethics is the analysis of ethical issues and the application of research ethics principles. especially on internet. There's nothing wrong to use internet. There's nothing wrong to go and get information on internet. But we need to look at the ethics around that. I cannot just go on internet and take certain information and put it in my work the way it is. I need to go and take that information, as crucial as it is, and make sure that in my work, I cite it properly. Then it means it is ethical. You cite it properly and you provide a reference around that. That's all you need to do. And if, for example, it's a certain procedure which you want to adopt in your study or in your research, you indicate that this procedure is adopted from so and so. If you find that there's nothing you have added in that procedure, so you just cite it as a procedure from so and so. But if you adopt it and you add one element, then it means you have adopted it and maybe you have modified it. Basically, I'm saying a simple example. If, for example, you are doing a certain study and you decide to say, maybe it's a procedure which you want to develop. Then you develop that procedure, but there are people who have already developed almost similar procedure. But you want to add a little bit of your touch. Maybe only one step or one procedure. It means now you have adopted it as per those people. That's why we say you have adopted it. So that when they cite you, they will say it was adopted from a so and so as indicated by you. So what I'm trying to say is that, colleagues, online is fine, but let's make sure that you use the proper way of acknowledging people's work. You need to acknowledge other people's work. When you look at my presentation at the end, I've indicated the bulk of the reference list, because some of the information are not from me. Maybe I've paraphrased there and there, but it also comes from other people. Internet-based research is research which utilizes the internet to collect information through various online tools. You can use a lot of online tools. Could be a survey, could be maybe through whatever platform you are there online. You know, you can go to Google and collect information there and so on. But it's been allowed, colleagues. But what's important is that we need to be ethical about it.
Carl has just sent a question, posted a question there. He said, what if the findings can be harmful to participants?
It is an honest question. But remember that what we are trying as much as possible, we want the findings not to be harmful to the participants. It is around that to say that when, in regards to the ethical clearance, which I'm going to touch on, that it's so crucial to have ethical clearance. And there are stages on which you need to make sure that you adhere to the ethics. And one of the stages is that if you have written your research proposal, before it could be finalized, the issue of ethics needs to be looked at. And when they look at this issue of ethics in your research proposal, they are trying to ensure as much as possible they avoid some of these things of the findings to be more harmful to the participants. And I think if we can look at that process, it's lengthy. It's lengthy. You know, the ethical clearance, when you complete those forms, are lengthy and you get tired. And sometimes they send to you and they are not happy with this. Sometimes they're not happy with that. It's a process we need to go through, because at the end, they'll give you ethical clearance, which you need to use when you collect your data. You can't collect your data without ethical clearance. And the other thing, that's why somewhere in my presentation, I'll be talking about risk. We need to ensure that the research we are doing, we also be true about the risk. If the findings are harmful, whom to blame? Whom to blame? And I don't know anyone wants to be blamed. That's why there is a process, which you call it the student and supervisor process, whereby whatever you write, the supervisor will be there to guide you. You can't just go and publish your findings as a student without the supervisor going through them. There are a lot of ethics. And before even those findings can be published, your work should be taken to external examination, where I think 2 or 3 external examiners are going to look at your work. And they'll look at that. And also, if, for example, there's a need to go and re-look at the ethics clearance certificate, they go and look at it and your research proposal. So we hope, Carl, that findings are not going to be harmful. You remember I've spoke about some of the communities where they make sure that they stick on ethics. You know, the institutions, what they do, they have a research ethics committee. And sometimes what I've learned is that when you go through the whole process, yes, you have to submit your research proposal with methodology and all of this, but their main focus is on ethics. Ethics. Because you must understand, colleagues, that if, for example, you publish something under a certain institution and it's been provoked, think about the name of that institution. But maybe that's how I see it, Carl. I don't know if some colleagues, they have a different contribution around that. But Carl, that's a simplest answer I can give from my side, even though I've added a lot of things, I know. But basically, we hope and believe that our findings are well accepted. You know, yes, there will be queries about your findings. There will be queries. There will be queries about your findings when you present your findings in different platforms. People are going to ask you questions. All right? But maybe, thanks, Carl. Maybe let's look at the task for 5 minutes quickly. If, for example, colleagues, I'm not saying that you must go in Google, please. I know that's where you are. Maybe some of you have access to the internet, but I want a simple understanding. What is your understanding about indigenous communities? What type of communities are that? And do you think that ethics should also be considered when we deal with this type of communities? Do you think ethics is so important to them? Who are those communities? Thanks, colleagues. It's 5 past. And I can see that we have great responses. And maybe some of 1 or 2 would like to raise their hands. We will offer you that opportunity. But there's one thing which I want to look at here, where Tembecker says indigenous communities are those who are not informed about their rights. In other words, they don't know their rights. And I agree with her up to a certain extent. You know, these indigenous communities, they learn from the previous experiences. And going forward, they become more empowered. But initially, they didn't know about their rights. And I agree, honestly. That's why other researchers, they will take advantages around those communities. And also, Lindell says the response to Carl's question show us why it is so important to consider every possibility that's risk when compiling your ethical clearance request. I agree with you 100%. We need to consider the risk. And like I said, when you go through all the process of completing your ethical clearance forms, you'll be getting support. You are not alone in this journey. There will be support you'll be getting, and the support will assist you so that you avoid one of the aspects that Carl have raised. But when you look at Temberger, she says great awareness should be implemented. I think she's referring to the last bulleted point where I've asked to say, do you think that ethics should also be considered when dealing this type of communities? Then someone said, workshops and door-to-door informing communities. In other words, communities need to be informed about ethics in regards to it as a process. And what is ethics, you know? And I like it the way some of the authors are putting it, which I'm going to share one of the authors. If there's someone who wants to raise something, colleagues, the chat is still open, or you can raise your hand. Let's go to the next point. You know, there are a lot of things, colleagues. There are a lot of things. Remember, I've said, maybe I'm talking about indigenous communities here, but it also refers to the institutions. One colleague of ours attended one of the programs she was offering, Professor Moira Keane, and she opened maybe my eyes, you know, honestly, to say, yes, we talk about all of these things, colleagues, all of these things, you know, especially in higher education and so on, which is not even my field, but we normally talk about decolonization of the content and all of those things. But she said, maybe we need to have a discussion on decolonization of ethics. And it's a touchy and a deep concept. Then she indicated the issue of African-centered ethics. And when she shared that, I was so fascinated, especially when she shared all the processes. And some of the processes we are familiar with, but maybe, colleagues, you know, sometimes some of those things, all right? But the way it was documented, she took us to say she was conducting this type of research in this indigenous community, and there were processes which that need to be followed. Serious and ethical processes which she didn't even understand, you know, but those processes has to be followed, especially in some of our communities which are more rural, where you can't even talk to the chief. You can't even go to the school and conduct your research. The school will say the point of departure is there, whether the chief or the headman and so on. The same thing in our schools. I can't just wake up and say, I got a friend at a certain high school, then let me go and conduct research. The principal will refer me to the protocol, say it starts there. Get permission from the Department of Education. Then you get permission. Go to the district. Convince the school governing body. Then from there you can come to me. And when you come to the principal says, we also need to get a go-ahead from the participants. So all those protocols are there. Yes, we refer to those people as gatekeepers. I think the term gatekeepers is so strong, but it says that you can't have access towards any institution or indigenous community without passing those people. or going through those people. I've just put it there to say gatekeeping within research context. Within research context, colleagues, please, just take it from there, because sometimes it can create another thing, but we are more focusing on research as a context. It's an individual or an organization that controls access to individuals and groups in an organization or community. Colleagues, I want to give a simple example, a very, very simple example. I'm familiar with Northwest, all right, for some other reasons. If I decide to say, I go to that community, for example, if I decide to go to the Batako, all right, which they are based in Mabiskral, all right, then I go there, I've got few relatives there, then I sleep there, then the following day, then I go out around the community of Mabiskral to the Batakos. Then I start to do my interview or hand out the questionnaire. Colleagues, I want to tell you, no one is going to answer me. No one. And no one is going to complete my questionnaire. Instead, they can run away from you. Why? Because it is a community where they still have the rules and procedures to say everything must start from the Lekgotla. And you can't just go there at the Lekgotla as welcome. Someone must be able to introduce you to the Lekgotla. Then if they give you permission, then you can go and get your data from the communities. And everyone is going to be at ease with you. That's why gatekeeping is so crucial. It's not only in these indigenous communities, it's also there in our institutions. The emphasis of the ethic clearance is one of the way of gatekeeping by the research ethics committees to say, we can't proceed with your study with us if we don't give you this ethical clearance, which has a specific number. And it's the one you are going to use if you are going to collect data from outside, so that everyone will trust you to say you have been given permission. Gatekeepers are mostly people who have to live with the consequences of the research. They have to. If I give permission as a gatekeeper, I live with the consequences. You can't just give a permission or an access for a person to go and do data collection or do research. You must know that you are going to live with the consequences. It's so important to read these ethical clearance documents, because at the end you have to append your signature as a gatekeeper, as a person who gives approval. And I think Cohen indicates it clearly. But when looking at the African-centered ethics, according to Prof. Moyer, is that maybe we need to talk about the notion that there should be a relationship with communities. In other words, let's build this relationship with these communities. Let's make sure that the research we do with them is going to be of benefit for them. If there are any proceeds around the research itself, let them also benefit. If you ask them to go and share some of the findings with you, and you get a little bit of a funding there and there, let them benefit. And I like it the way it is according to this author, is that when I look back, attending some of the conferences, I've seen some of the supervisors who come with their students in the conferences. And that relationship is good because it empowers the student to say, you are there to protect your work. because at the end, they are the one who are presenting. The professor or the supervisor will guide if the questions are more technical, but it empowers them. That relationship is quite interesting and good. But when you look according to the African-centered ethics, the way Prof. Kian see it, she says a framework of Ubuntu could be used as a guide. That framework, Ubuntu. If the community says, we don't see the benefit of your research, accept it. Don't go around the corner and do what you call a desktop research. No, they don't see the benefit. It is your responsibility to convince them. And also, hence, ethical obligations cannot be sufficiently met through conventional contractual agreement. In other words, the issue of obligation in regards to ethics, sometimes the contract is there, but that principle of Ubuntu, because it's a matter of creating trust. If the community trusts you, if the participant trusts you, they give it all. It's a fact, they give it all. But if there's that mistrust, they withhold some of the information. Whether it's in the form of when you collect your data using questionnaire and you give them a certain Likert scale. Let's say your Likert scale is 5, and somewhere you have neutral. The majority of them, they are going to cross on neutral. And there's a reason behind that. They are holding. Maybe there's no trust. But doesn't mean that you don't analyze that type of data. All right, it is also noted that other countries have started to conceptualize the issue of ethical protocols around their communities. Yeah, it is happening in communities, in some of the institutions, right? Basically, why ethics matters. Research that involves human beings and the living subjects, most of the time, it can raise a lot of ethical issues. Also the legal, social, and political issues. Think about if you conduct your research with certain living species, and your research is more harmful to them, it could have a legal connotation or a legal point of view where people are going to challenge you. I will give an example about SPCA. If you conduct any research with a living species like dogs, for argument's sake, and your research is more harmful to them, it could have a lot of legal connotation. So we need also to make sure that we don't only look at human beings. Let us also look at this living species or subjects. It is clear that there are objectives in research ethics, and some of those objectives, as I've indicated there, to protect human participants. I think we have spoken up against that, so that we protect these human participants against risk-associated aspects, so that you don't do any harm. Also, to ensure that research is conducted in a way that it serves the interests of individuals, groups, or societies. And the last one, which is also important in regards to the objectives in research ethics, to examine specific research activities for ethical soundness. We need to ensure that the research we are doing in the form of activities, they have a clear ethical soundness. If you look at ethical issues in research, it also could be looked as they relate to the participant. In other words, we've touched on that a little bit to say these ethical issues are also related to the participant. And how are they related to the participant? And how are they related to the researchers and also the sponsoring organizations? Because some of the research is being funded. Ethical issues concerning research participants includes amongst others, when you collect the data, there should be ethical processes adhered to. Seeking consent, I think we'll talk about that later again. And also in regards to providing incentives. And we must be clear as researchers that when we provide incentives, we are not buying our participants. No, we are not. We are saying to them, according to Ubuntu, thank you for taking your time and participate in this process. And an incentive can be in a different ways. You know, sometimes when you do our research face-to-face before COVID, most of the time, sometimes you put your participant in a certain venue, then you do interview or you issue them with surveys or questionnaires. Then you provide them with maybe a sort of a light menu, you know, from your own pocket as a researcher. It's to say thank you. It's an incentive. Others, they go further and they offer you a voucher. Others, they offer big prices. But those things, they need to be mentioned to the participant. They must be aware of that. You know, there's one survey I've completed, I think last week, if I'm not mistaken. Interesting survey. They said it's going to take 20 minutes. But when I look, it was more over 20 minutes. But I've said I want to complete this survey because I want to add my voice on to this survey. Towards the end, then I saw that they are going to give a voucher. And I have to submit my email address. And that's how it's been done. Because if you put the incentive up front, you know what participants do? If, for example, it's a questionnaire, they'll complete the first part of their biographical information and provide maybe their details. Then you are left with the rest of the questionnaire not being completed. But we need to make sure that those incentives are being informed and to the participant and keep to that information so that they trust us. The other one, it has to do with ethical issues relating to the researcher. It includes avoiding biasness. As a researcher, you should avoid biasness as much as possible. Why biasness is so crucial? Because once you start to be biased, it means you are not ethical. It's also important to use appropriate research methodology. And that appropriate research methodology is the one when they give you ethical clearance with a number and so on, and you submit it to a research proposal, that's the one you're supposed to use. But going forward, colleagues, we know things are happening. We've seen with our students from the previous year, especially last year during COVID. They had good research methods they want to use and the way they want to collect data. But COVID said, I'm here. Can't do it face to face. So they have to make sure that they liaise with their supervisor so that if there are major changes, then they have to apply for new ethical clearance. But if they are minor, they will be able to justify those changes. The other one in regards to the researcher, correct reporting is also crucial, and also using the participant information. Can't use the participant information without their consent or having informed them upfront. I like it the way the colleagues have indicated. Before they can even start to record the session, they have to inform us. That's how it's been done. We need to move a little bit faster now. And the third one, in regards to ethical issues in research, is that ethical issues relating to the sponsoring organization. So there are some ethical issues in regards to the sponsors. And most of the time, it includes the issue of the budget. The researcher should convince the funders to say their research problem, it's a priority and it is feasible. And it's also cost effective. Those are the things which you need to convince your funder to say, no, my research problem or issue is crucial and it's going to add value. And also, it is not so much expensive to conduct this research. That's why they will ask you to also to give the outline of the budget. So that when they make decisions, they make informed decisions. And also it's feasible. It's doable. You know, this research, it is doable. And justify some of those aspects. But the other one, which in regards to ethical issues to sponsoring organization, is the monitoring and evaluation system. They always put this aspect on how the project or research is going to be monitored and be evaluated. And it's so imperative and important for you as a researcher to be aware about this process of monitoring and evaluation. All right? Because sometimes they can ask you for quarterly reports, could be yearly reports or monthly reports. So they need to see where are you with the project as a researcher. They monitor and they evaluate. And you must know that sometimes this sponsored research, they have conditions. If it's for 3 years and you are not able to complete this project within 3 years, some of them, they'll say you refund the money. Some of them, they can give you a chance as long as you complete it. But if you decide to leave it at the middle, there are costs involved. The issue of ethics clearance, colleagues. Why ethics clearance is important? It's so important because it keeps everyone safe and respected. You know, if you do your study or your research and you got this permission in a form of ethical clearance with a specific number, you feel that your work is being recognized. And people, they like to look at that. Even though sometimes we think it's not so important. In students nowadays, I know that you cannot conduct any research or collect any data from the students. And our students, colleagues, some of them they are not minors, if I can put it that way. Which if you go to a school level, a minor, you need to go get the permission from the parent and so on. These people are at university, they are adults, but you can't collect data from them without going through the ethical clearance process. It's compulsory. Otherwise, your work is not going to be validated. They'll ask you, did you get the ethical clearance? Who offered you that ethical clearance? So it means you are doing such a study which is more good without following protocol. It also helps you to get funding. For example, if you're a student and you are doing maybe your honors or your masters, then you got an ethical clearance. If you need funding from some of the organizations like your National Research, the NRF, then you're able to get funding because your study or your research, it has an ethical clearance. It works for your plus. Takes time, get tired to complete the forms and so on, but it works for you. Yeah, it could also be used when you do publication. You know, if you want to write any publication, then you say this research has been given ethical clearance by the University of South Africa, and here it is the ethical clearance number. It carries weight. It carries weight. Basically, how to obtain ethical clearance for your research, we encourage you, colleagues, when you are at that stage, read about the ethical clearance guidelines. And like I've said, colleges, they have their own. I know about College of Education at UNISA. It's a thick document which needs to be completed. But sometimes when I look at it, when assisting other students, it's a huge document, but already the student has a research proposal. Most of the points are coming from the research proposal, but we have to elaborate more. And it takes time, colleagues. You get tired, you send it. Sometimes they reject it, sometimes they say correct there and there. You send it again until they are happy, like we've spoken. I think the purpose is to avoid harm. You need to complete the relevant ethical clearance forms. They will ask you various forms. They will ask you to put your research proposal as one of the documents. There are lots of documents they'll be asking from you in that form. And you need also, they can ask you to attach some of the supporting documents. But completing it, colleagues, I've seen most of the supervisors, they assist their students. But if you don't get assistance from the students, complete it with the hope that they'll look at it, and normally they look at it, and they'll give an informed feedback. I like the way they give feedback to students. It's an empowering way. And when are we supposed to apply for this ethical clearance? I think I've spoken about that. During the proposal acceptance. Immediately your research proposal is being accepted, most of the time by your supervisor, then you apply for the ethical clearance. And also before you collect any data, we've spoken about that. You cannot just go and collect data online because now we're online without having ethical clearance. Other people are very informed. They'll ask you that, can I see a permission? Did you get ethical clearance? Where is the number? While there are steps to be followed in ethics clearance, like I've indicated, these are some of the steps which need to be followed. The first thing what you do, which is step 1, you complete the application form, all right? Like I've said, it's more detailed. Then your application form is being sent to the Research Ethics Committee, which will start to review it or evaluate it. And the Research Ethics Committee have options to say the first one, maybe they can look at it and say, I think this application needs to be rejected. And they will inform you if they reject it. And they'll give you reasons, I hope. Then they could say maybe there is something in this application form. Maybe you need to correct there and there and send it back. And we correct and send it back. And also maybe they can say further, they give you another feedback and say, no, we are not happy there and there. Rectify. Then if they are happy about the whole content of the application form, then they accept it and they give you a letter, which they call it an ethical clearance letter with the unique number and also the topic which you are researching on. And that you also use it sometimes, especially not sometimes, always when you are going to write your research reports. When you justify your ethics processes and procedures, you also attach it as an appendix or annexure, whatever term you use there. So it gives your work more authentic, colleagues. We'll touch a little bit on the Research Ethics Committee, not in detail, just in passing, because what I know is that each and every institution, they have, some of them, they call it the Faculty Research Ethics Committees. Some of them, they call them the College Research Ethics Committees. So whatever terminology they refer to, I'll stick on the Research Ethics Committee, all right? Which it has various roles to play, various roles according to the institution itself. One, it has responsibilities. And some of the responsibilities, they make sure that they monitor the appropriateness and effectiveness for granting or withholding ethical approval. They monitor, they check to say before they can grant this ethical clearance, does the participant or the researcher meet all the ethical conditions? They also advise on policy issues related to research ethics, because they also learn from what's happening in academics. And if there is a need to change in regards to the process and responsibilities in those research ethics, they effect to that. And I remember speaking to one person who is a chairperson of the Research Ethics Committee in one of the institutions. And he indicated strongly, that professor, to say, basically they were looking at everything, all right? But now they're focusing more on ethics. Can have a good research methodology, but if the ethics are not sounding, they don't give approval. Like I've said, what happened negatively, it affects also the institution. No one wants to be on the media, by the way. They also advise on issues related to the research integrity and so on. So they have a huge responsibility to play. But they have some aims. One of the aims is to consider, also to grant permission for the undertaking of the research. They grant permission. You remember that you can't collect your data without getting a research ethical clearance. You can't do that. And also they act as an advisory body to the research ethics. I've mentioned that one. They sponsor appropriate training. If they feel that as a committee of research ethics, and the students are not familiar about the development or the completion of the application form, they also conduct research. They have that responsibility to conduct research and also to give empowerment to the participant through workshops or seminars and so on. I want us to look at the risk in research. It says that the categories of risk in research. What's important about risk is that I've put some points here so that you understand what risk is. Risk is often defined by reference to the potential or psychological harm, discomfort, or stress to human participants that a research project might generate. In other words, sometimes the risk could be generated by the research project itself. So we need to be aware about this risk. That's why when you apply for the ethical clearance, the form also asks you about the risk. And remember the one for the College of Education, they ask you about the risk. But when you look at the risk, I've tried to categorize it into 4 categories, category 1, 2, 3, and 4, and give it colors. I just gave the colors the way I feel they are appropriate to the category. Maybe you have your own color you can give there, because sometimes I'm colorblind, but it's fine. But when you look at the first category, the risk, we say it is more negligible since there are no or indirect harm to the participants who are involved. So the participants are there, but there's no harm or direct harm. So we categorize it as category 1. But when you look at category 2, the risks there are very low, even though there are human participants involved. Category 3, you need to indicate to say the risk are more of medium. So the last one category, guys, that's why I've put red. It's a red flag to say the risks are high. And it's eminent in that category that the risks are high. If a more foreseeable risk of harm, that may include maybe physical, psychological, or social, could be imminent. And that could also lead maybe to very, very serious consequences to the participant. And there are huge repercussions around that. And this risk needs to be managed in a responsible way. In other words, even though there's high risk in your research, it needs to be managed. And when they look at that part of the application where you talk about risk, they will want to know how are you going to manage this risk, because it's huge and high. So you need also to justify that. But there are some further ethical aspects, which I'm not going to touch a lot on them. I'm going to briefly explain them. Some of them we've spoken about them. The first one is conflict of interest. It's one of the ethical aspects you need to consider. Let's look at this as a conflict of interest. I am Welcome Kubeka, and my son is doing his master's, and I'm lecturing in this department, and my son also studies in this department. And I say to the institution or to the department, I am willing to supervise my son in regards to his master's. And that is a red flag in regards to the conflict of interest. Instead of saying, yes, I can see that there are students who are doing their masters, and during the process of choosing the supervisor, may I be excluded because there is a conflict of interest. One of the candidates I'm related to. So I need to be excluded to avoid conflict of interest. Also, the issue of sensitive topics. I've spoken about that one. Colleagues, I'm not stopping you to do any sensitive topics. And it's good, because those topics, they challenge us. But make sure that you have done your groundwork in the right way, so that through the whole process, your research goes seamlessly without any challenge. And that's why sometimes we say to our students, especially in the section when you do the quantitative data collection, and you put a section on biographical information. Don't collect any biographical information which you are not going to use, and make sure that you avoid some of the sensitive one. If you are so bold, it's fine, and good luck. Then the other one is the informed consent. I've spoken about that one. But the discomfort to participate also, it's another ethical aspect which you need to look at. Your participant, they must be comfortable. Because if they are comfortable, they have a buy-in and they trust you and they give it all. And also you need to look at the ethical aspect in regards to the legal requirements. I think I've given a simple example in regards, for example, if you conduct a research in our correctional services. There are legal requirements you need to follow. There are processes which you need to follow. For example, you cannot disclose the participants' names, let alone their faces and so on, for legal aspects around that. But that's how I can discuss, explain these few concepts. Colleagues, I know that I'm running a bit out of time, but before we can call it off, I have this as an example of an exercise. And when I look at the time, it's almost 47 minutes to 4. If you say, let's say 10 to 4, give us 10 minutes, colleagues. And from my side, I'll be doing injustice to this activity. So maybe when you receive the recording or the power presentation, read the activity and try to answer the expected required. But basically the activity, it gives us an idea to indicate some of the unethical issues or aspects which could be identified in the activity itself. And I think some of those unethical aspects have been covered mostly in this slide, where I talk about conflict of interest, not sensitive topic, but informed consent, discomfort to the participant, and so on. But there are lots you can identify. Because one of the things we like to do things quickly. And I'm not saying based on the activity, colleagues, to say it's wrong for this teacher or educator to go and conduct research at the school where he is teaching. There's nothing wrong with that. We have done it, some of us. But there are some of the ethical processes which need to be followed. And adhering to those ethical processes, sometimes it assists to elevate the issue of conflict of interest. And I do apologize, colleagues, not taking you through this activity. I enjoyed this activity, honestly, but I think my 2 hours, I've done what I'm supposed to do. Maybe try to give you the last opportunity, colleagues. Let's share and try to answer whatever questions are there. Or if something you need me to clarify, I think I'll be able to clarify those aspects. But looking on the chart, colleagues, I can see that Lindelwa says, thank you, Dr. Kubeka, for raising the issue of ethics and indigenous communities. We've seen how these communities have been exploited over the years for their intellectual and material resources without any benefit accruing to them. I can't agree with you more. We have seen it, colleagues. We've seen it, and it's what we are trying to avoid. We are trying to avoid some of these things, and I like the way one colleague said on the chart that we need to workshop them. We need to have a word with some of them, to say it can't be for things to be done the way they used to be done in the past. We can't exploit these communities. And colleagues, I'm telling you, some of these things, we see them when times goes on, I remember in my times long time ago, which I'm not trying to share my age, by the way, as a school, we used to have what you call the handwork day and the sewing day, at primary, which more was on Wednesday. And we'll wear our khakis, as boys. Then our girls, they'll do their sewing and so on. So what we'll do, if you didn't bring your handwork or your handcraft, you have been punished. Sometimes we used to be taken to the community, whereby we will be asked to make sure that we make the road to be more usable, by putting stones and so on. And being supervised by the older learners. And because we were on the field, some of them, they punished us. But when you look back, it has nothing to do with any empowerment to us, honestly. Because sometimes you may find that some of us in those communities, our parents didn't even have cars. Because this person and that person, they have cars. They want to make sure that the road is seamless for them. And that is unethical, but we realize those things when you are old. The same thing with the resources, colleagues. Let's hope this workshop, it has opened our eyes. Someone wants to say something, because I was just referring to this chart now. Any contribution, colleagues? Because I've picked out something now. I think somewhere, if I'm not mistaken in my presentation, I wanted you guys to think about research ethics and come with a concept which are coming from your side. I think I've missed this slide. I don't know why, but it's fine. But if you look at the next slide, there are some of the words which are more prominent in ethics. Words like, for example, truth, conduct, and so on. And we can form a little bit of a word cloud around that. But I want us colleagues to share for a few minutes. If someone wants to share something, we have a few minutes. And Carl also says bias should also be very important. Yes, I agree with you, Carl. Maybe if I want to get it clear, what actually do you mean around that? Because reading it now, I'm getting something. If you say to us bias should also be very important, maybe we can elaborate more so that you can have a clue.
I think our personal feelings should not be involved when we do research, and we should be careful about our preconceived ideas and the way we feel about things, and not make that part of our research, but instead concentrate on the way the participants feel and think and see things, and not force our ways and the way we think into our research process.
Thanks, Carl. I think you're clear. You're clear now, and I think even the colleagues now, they are able to follow what you are saying there. Thanks for elaborating on that. You know, and I like the way we should not have preconceived ideas, you know, because sometimes if we have preconceived ideas, we would like to push our research into a certain direction. And so if some things, they don't come their own way, we end up, when we do the data analysis sometimes, or the findings, we invent things so that our preconceived ideas should be on the research itself. Thanks for clarifying that, and I agree with you almost 100%, Carl. Before I can close, colleagues, I've provided some of the references on this slide so that I can safeguard myself. And if I didn't provide any reference, I think somewhere on the PowerPoint I've cited the authors and so on, so that at least I try to be on the safe side.